What if I told you that some people can move their bodies in ways that seem to completely ignore the rules of human anatomy? Imagine watching someone lower themselves backward until their hands touch the floor, then somehow continue moving as if their body were made of rubber. Imagine someone balancing upside down, twisting through a movement that looks almost impossible to follow with your eyes, while another performer rolls across the floor with the precision and speed of a machine. For most of us, flexibility means touching our toes without bending our knees. For these people, that is barely the beginning. Their bodies can fold, rotate, bend and move through positions that would leave an ordinary person wondering whether what they are seeing is even real. And the strangest part, they aren't performing magic. They aren't using special effects. They are real people who have spent years developing extraordinary control over movement. But there is a question that makes everything even more fascinating. Are these truly the most flexible people in the world? Or are we only seeing the smallest glimpse of what the human body can actually do? Today, we're stepping into the unbelievable world of extreme flexibility, contortion and record-breaking movement, where the difference between impossible and possible can be measured in seconds, centimeters and degrees. And before this journey is over, you may never look at the human body the same way again. Because when you see what these performers can do, the first reaction isn't usually admiration. It's disbelief. You stare at the screen, you replay the moment, you slow it down. And somehow, it still doesn't make sense. How did they do that? How can a person move like that? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how did they train themselves to become this flexible? Flexibility is something almost everyone understands, at least in a basic sense. You stretch, you try to reach farther, you loosen up, maybe you practice yoga or gymnastics. But there is a massive difference between being flexible and possessing the kind of extreme control demonstrated by professional contortionists and record holders. For these athletes and performers, flexibility isn't simply about stretching farther. It's about control, balance, strength, coordination, timing, body awareness, and an extraordinary understanding of where every part of the body is in space. That distinction is important, because when you watch somebody perform an extreme movement, it can look effortless. That is often the illusion. The smoother the performer becomes, the less you see the years of preparation behind the movement. You don't see the countless repetitions. You don't see the practice sessions. You don't see the concentration. You don't see the moments when a movement didn't work. You only see the final performance. And that final performance can look almost impossible. One of the people who demonstrates just how extreme this world can become is Eddie John Brown from Sierra Leone, also known as Eddie Flexible. His achievement is one of those records that sounds almost fictional when you first hear it. He broke the record for the most consecutive full-body revolutions with a back-bend handstand by completing 21. Think about that for a moment. A back-bend handstand already requires an extraordinary combination of flexibility, strength and balance. Now imagine adding rotation, and then imagine repeating that rotation again, and again, and again, 21 times. The human brain has difficulty processing movements like this, because they are so far outside our everyday experience. When most people stand up, their bodies have a predictable relationship with gravity. Feet are underneath them. Head is above the body, hands are usually free to move. But when someone goes into a backbend handstand, the entire relationship changes. The hands become a foundation, the legs and torso move into an unusual position, the head and spine are oriented differently. Balance becomes much more complicated, and then the performer begins rotating. That is when something extraordinary happens. What looks chaotic to the viewer is actually controlled. Every movement has to happen at the right moment. Too much rotation and the performer could lose balance. Too little and the sequence could stop. The body has to remain coordinated while moving through a position most people would struggle simply to hold. And that is one of the secrets of extreme flexibility. It isn't enough to reach a position. You have to control yourself while you're there. That is why watching elite contortionists can be so deceptive. Their movements often look soft, fluid, almost relaxed. But underneath that apparent softness is tremendous physical control. The body has to know where it is. The performer has to understand balance instinctively. And every movement must be calculated. Now imagine seeing this without knowing what is about to happen. A performer enters the space. They look completely ordinary. They walk, they stand, they smile. Then suddenly, they begin moving. The spine curves, the shoulders shift, the legs travel through a position that seems completely unfamiliar. And within seconds, the performer has transformed into something that looks almost impossible. That contrast is one of the reasons extreme flexibility is so fascinating. The person looks normal, the movement does not. And then there is Liberty Barros, another name associated with extraordinary flexibility and record-breaking movement. Liberty Barros set a record for the fastest 20-meter back-bend knee-lock walk, completing it in 22.53 seconds. Just reading that description can make your brain pause. A backbend is already a difficult position for most people. But walking while maintaining that position is another challenge entirely. And doing it quickly introduces another layer of difficulty. The body has to remain controlled while moving forward. The performer cannot simply collapse into the position and stay there. They have to travel. They have to coordinate movement. They have to maintain balance. And they have to do it against the clock. This is where a record attempt becomes more than a demonstration of flexibility. It becomes a demonstration of precision, because when time matters, every movement matters. A fraction of a second can separate a record from an ordinary performance, and the faster the movement becomes, the harder it becomes to maintain perfect control. This is what makes Guinness World Records so fascinating. The records aren't simply about people being unusual. They turn unusual abilities into measurable achievements. Distant time, repetitions, speed, quantity. Once something can be measured, it can be challenged. And once it can be challenged, someone eventually asks the question, can it be done faster? Can it be done farther? Can it be done more times? That question is responsible for some of the strangest achievements humans have ever produced, and flexibility may be one of the most visually spectacular categories of all. Because unlike a number on a stopwatch, flexibility can look completely unreal. You can see the movement happening in front of you, your eyes tell you it is real, your brain tells you it shouldn't be possible. And somehow, both things are happening at the same time. But where does this ability come from? Are some people simply born flexible? Does training create it? Is it genetics? Is it discipline? Is it years of practice? The answer is more complicated than any one word. Human bodies are different. People naturally have different ranges of motion, different joint structures, different proportions, different levels of muscular control, and different histories of physical activity. But extreme performance is rarely the result of one factor alone. It requires development, it requires practice. And for professional performers, it requires understanding the body. That is why the world of contortion is so much more than simply stretching. A performer needs strength to support unusual positions. They need balance to maintain them, they need coordination to move between them, and they need awareness to know exactly what their body is doing. Think about balancing on one foot. Even that simple movement requires your nervous system to constantly make tiny adjustments. Your ankle moves, your knee responds, your hips adjust, your torso shifts, your arms may move. Your eyes provide information, your brain processes everything. Now multiply that complexity by a movement involving an extreme body position. Suddenly, what looked like one simple trick becomes an incredibly complicated sequence of physical decisions. This is why the best performers make difficult movements look easy. They have trained the complicated parts until those parts become almost automatic, and that creates another illusion. The audience sees ease, the performer feels control. Those are not the same thing. Behind every smooth movement is preparation. And behind preparation is repetition. But repetition alone isn't enough. A person can't simply force their body into extreme positions and expect to become a record holder. Training has to be appropriate and carefully managed. The human body has limits. Joints have structures. Muscles and connective tissues have limits, and pushing beyond safe limits can lead to injury. The incredible performers featured in record-breaking displays are not evidence that everyone should attempt extreme movements. Quite the opposite. Their abilities are specialized skills developed through dedicated training. Watching an expert doesn't make an extreme movement safe for an inexperienced person. And this is an important part of the story that can easily be forgotten when the camera focuses only on the spectacular result, because entertainment shows you the moment. It doesn't always show you the process. You see the performer bend. You don't see the years behind the bend. You see the record. You don't see every attempt that came before it. You see the celebration. You don't see the concentration required to make the attempt possible, and perhaps that is what makes these records even more impressive. They aren't simply demonstrations of unusual physical abilities. They are demonstrations of commitment. Consider what it means to pursue a highly specialized skill for years. You have to keep practicing when nobody is watching. You have to continue when progress becomes slow. You have to repeat movements that may look boring from the outside. You have to develop patience. And you have to learn from mistakes. Eventually, the movement that once seemed impossible begins to feel familiar. Then something strange happens. The performer stops thinking about every tiny detail. The body begins to remember. Movement becomes instinctive. That is when mastery begins to appear. And when mastery appears, the audience sees something beautiful. Not because the movement is easy, but because the struggle has been hidden. The performer has transformed difficulty into fluidity. That transformation is one of the most powerful things about athletic performance. A sprinter makes running at incredible speed look simple. A gymnast makes a complicated routine look effortless. A pianist makes a difficult piece sound natural. And a contortionist makes the human body appear almost weightless. The performance is the final product of thousands of invisible decisions. That is why the title, "Are they the most flexible people in the world?" is such an interesting question, because what exactly does most flexible mean? Is it the person who can bend the farthest? The person who can hold the most extreme position? The person who can perform the fastest? The person who can combine flexibility with movement? Or the person who can perform the greatest number of unusual movements? There isn't necessarily one universal answer. Different records measure different abilities. And that makes the world of flexibility much bigger than a single competition. One performer may specialize in speed, another may specialize in balance, another may specialize in contortion. Another may specialize in strength, another may combine several of these abilities into one extraordinary routine. So instead of one person being the ultimate flexible human, there can be an entire collection of specialists who each push a different boundary, and that is exactly what makes the record world so fascinating. Every record creates a new question. Every achievement creates another target. And every target eventually attracts someone who believes it can be beaten. Imagine standing in front of a record board. You see a number, maybe it is a time. Maybe it is a distance. Maybe it is a repetition count. That number represents the limit someone has already reached. To everyone else, it looks enormous. But to the next challenger, it becomes an invitation. They don't see a wall, they see a starting point. That's how records evolve. Human achievement rarely moves forward because someone says, "This is enough." It moves because someone looks at what has already been done and asks, "What if? What if I can go farther? What if I can move faster? What if I can do one more? What if I can combine these skills? What if the impossible isn't impossible after all?" That mindset appears again and again in the stories of record holders. And extreme flexibility might be one of the clearest examples. Because the human body seems to have an obvious visual boundary. You look at someone standing normally and you think you understand how a body moves. Then a contortionist enters the picture. Suddenly, your definition of normal changes. The body becomes a system of possibilities. The spine can curve. The shoulders can rotate. The hips can move. The legs can travel through enormous ranges. And the entire body can become part of a carefully coordinated sequence. But perhaps the most impressive part isn't the flexibility itself. It's the control. Imagine being upside down and having to know exactly where your hands are. Imagine rotating and knowing where your center of balance is. Imagine moving quickly while maintaining an unusual body position. Your brain must constantly receive information and respond. And the better the performer becomes, the more natural that response becomes. This is why elite flexibility performances can look almost hypnotic. The movement has rhythm. There is a beginning, a transition, a moment of maximum difficulty, and then a return. The performer moves through positions as if they are connected by invisible threads. One movement becomes another. One position becomes the setup for the next. And the audience is left wondering how the body managed to get there in the first place. Sometimes the most amazing moment isn't the final position, it's the transition, because holding a difficult position is one challenge. Getting into it smoothly is another, and getting out of it while remaining in control can be just as difficult. This is where performance becomes an art. The audience doesn't just see flexibility, they see choreography, timing, and first, confidence. The performer has to make the impossible look intentional, and when that happens, the result can be breathtaking. But let's go back to the question. Are they really the most flexible people in the world? The safest answer is that they are among the extraordinary people who have demonstrated record-breaking flexibility abilities. Guinness World Records itself describes the featured performers as some of the world's most flexible and bendy individuals, with the video showcasing multiple different flexibility records. That distinction matters. A record doesn't necessarily measure every possible aspect of human flexibility. It measures a specific achievement under defined conditions. And that's what makes a Guinness World Record so powerful. It turns an extraordinary ability into something concrete. A claim becomes a measurement becomes a record. And the record becomes part of history. Think about Eddie Flexible's 21 consecutive revolutions. The number 21 is simple, but behind it is an extraordinary physical skill. Behind that skill is practice, behind practice is discipline, and behind discipline is a person who decided to pursue something that most people would never even consider attempting. That's the human story hidden inside the number. The same is true for Liberty Barrows and her 22:53-second backbend knee lock walk. The number is precise, but the journey behind it is not. It involves time, training, performance, and the ability to remain focused when the pressure is highest, because once a record attempt begins, there is no room for hesitation. The clock doesn't care. The audience doesn't control the result. And the body has to perform. That is what makes records different from ordinary demonstrations. There is a target. There is a measurement. And there is a moment when everything counts. Imagine the seconds ticking away. The performer moves. The position is maintained. The movement continues. Every moment matters. Then the attempt ends. Silence. And finally, the result. That moment can carry enormous emotional weight, because the performer knows exactly how much work has led to those few seconds. The audience may have watched for less than a minute, but the performer has been preparing far longer. That is the hidden mathematics of greatness. A short performance can contain years of preparation. A few seconds can represent thousands of hours. A single successful attempt can become the visible tip of an enormous invisible iceberg. And that's why watching record holders can be inspiring, even when we have no intention of copying what they do. The lesson isn't that everyone should become a contortionist. The lesson is that human potential can be much larger than our everyday experience suggests. Most people never discover the full extent of what they can learn, not because they are incapable of improvement, but because they never spend years developing one highly specialized ability. The performers we are watching did. They took something extraordinary and turned it into a skill. And that is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. When does talent end and training begin? Maybe